Over a year ago I did a video about Formula Retro Racing, a flat-shaded polygon racer on the realms of the legendary Virtua Racing series. If you haven't seen that video, then click on the info on the screen or on the link in the description. Its sequel, Formula Retro Racing World Tour, feels more like an expansion rather than a sequel, but hey, that's fine, I guess. The thing you will see immediately are the visuals, so let's talk about those real quick because there isn't much to say here. After all, the developers didn't really need to upgrade or change anything, and therefore they didn't. Well, at least as far as I can see, but who knows, maybe I'm blind. There is something quite special about flat-shaded polygons. I don't know, it looks awesome. The colors are overall quite good and the tracks are quite fun to race on. But this time around, every single track is actually fun to race around, and there are quite a lot more tracks compared to the predecessor. And yes, some tracks, if not most, are based on real live tracks. However, it's still a shame that the old tracks don't return like Monaco or Fuji. But hey, 18 brand new tracks to race on, that's awesome! Most tracks tend to be rather big and wide, which in a way it makes sense, and I will get to that, but on the other hand it decreases the point of precision driving quite a bit. Which is why I would have liked to have Monaco back, or at least tracks like that. Tracks that are a bit more narrow and therefore force precision driving. But that also leads to a lot more carnage, okay? But that's also something I will get to, because carnage will be the norm here, more so than its predecessor. Now, if you've seen my video about the prequel, then you will know that there was one track that I hated because of its corners. And while there are some tracks in World Tour that also have corners like that, the thing is that drifting makes taking those corners far easier and it's way more fun. Yes, the developers have included drifting alongside circuit racing, and yes, you can choose which style to use before any race in any mode. While some tracks say drift, you don't really need to use a drift car to race. So when I say that you can drive whatever on any track, then I really mean it. When the track name is displayed and it says drift under it, I assume that's only the developer's suggestion to use a drift car instead of a circuit car, but again the choice is all yours. In fact, you will find that sometimes it's easier to win with a drift car or with a circuit car, because sometimes drifting makes everything easier or slipstream does the better job. The drift cars and the fact that you can choose to drive whatever at any time might actually explain why almost, if not all, tracks are big and wide. It's the developer's way to stop you from constantly hitting the walls, because just imagine if you used a drift car in a track like Monaco. But that's the reason why I think more narrow tracks should actually have been here as well, because it forces you to drive more precise instead of drifting all over the place. If Monaco was here, another solution would have been to simply not allow drift cars to compete, especially because circuit cars can also lead to enough carnage. No matter the difficulty, and especially in the back row, the opponents seem to love carnage, more so than its predecessor it seems. You always start from last place and often you will see car parts flying around or a lot of spinning. In fact, you will cause a lot of it yourself, because you can literally bulldoze yourself through almost everyone by barely taking damage. As if the game is encouraging you to drive into other opponents, as if this game were Destruction Derby or Twisted Metal or something. That's something I think should have been toned down a bit, meaning you should take more damage if you bulldoze yourself into other cars. But the game is actually lying to you. Let me explain. So, I've mentioned in the first game that you only have a single car as an option, just with different colors. Here you have 10 cars total, 5 drift and 5 circuit. And while that might seem nice at first, this may fool you in thinking that these are 5 individual cars with individual settings and whatever, but no. In reality, these are just 2 cars total, 1 drift and 1 circuit. But that one car has 5 different bodies, because once you drive with each car, you will notice pretty quickly that they all control the same. All 5 circuit cars drive the same, and so do the 5 drift cars. Literally, the only difference are the bodies of the cars, but that's about it. And that's quite a shame. It would have been cool if the cars felt different to drive, that one would feel heavier to control than the other, that one would take corners better than the other or something, but sadly no. They all feel the exact same. So yeah, while you see 10 cars, in reality there are just 2 with different bodies. But hey, at least it's not just one car with a single body like in the prequel. The physics feel essentially the same compared to the first game, maybe tweaked a bit for circuit cars to feel a tiny bit more responsive. But you barely will notice any difference really. Before I go to the drift cars, the circuit cars continue to use slipstream, but this time around I think it's for the worst, because of 2 reasons. 1. The slipstream seems to happen a bit too late, as if you have to almost rear-end the opponent in front of you for it to happen. Well, yeah, okay, it's a bit exaggerated, but it feels a bit off. And 2, it's because for some reason, once you get out of the slipstream, the car does a weird thing where it seems like the driver is kicking the brakes for half a second. I don't understand why this needs to happen when in the first game, when you got out of the slipstream, the transition from in to out of the slipstream was really smooth and you lost speed gradually, but here it's in an instant, which causes that braking effect you see for no reason. Now, the drifting itself. If you've played arcade races where you drift a lot like Ridge Racer or Outrun 2006, then here drifting works kinda similar. Just press in the direction and the car drifts automatically. Control your throttle as well brakes and, well, there you go. Sure, World Tour is nowhere near those legendary franchises I've mentioned, but still, it feels quite good to drift around. It's a really easy thing to do, but maybe too easy. And by that I mean that even if you just want to drive straight and therefore do very small adjustments here and there to do so, the car still tends to drift for half a second, which in turn slows you down. So unless you drift out of a corner into a straight line perfectly, you will lose a lot of time just trying to adjust to the line. In low speeds, this isn't an issue, obviously, but let's be honest, for the most part you will drive in high speeds, and the higher the speed, the worse it gets. This didn't need to happen. The developers could have given drift cars a bit more grip in the straights, or not let the cars drift as easily, because after a while, it will not be any fun to drive on straight with a drift car. But unlike circuit cars, there is no slipstream with drift cars. One thing that I found weird is that a lot of times you will disappear from the minimap once you are first. Here's an example. See how the red dot, still am displayed on the map, but once I go for first place, I suddenly disappear? That kind of weird bug happens often. Now, outside of these things, there are no real differences between these two games. The menus are exactly the same with the exact same options and literally not even visual changes. You will find the only difference in the settings. Remember this setting? It's gone in World Tour. Or, well, it's rather turned on from the start. Instead, you will get a tilt option, which basically means that you can drive using the gyro on the Switch controller instead of the analog sticks, which is, well, quite a nice idea, and while weird to drive that way at first, it feels quite fine after a while. Still, I use the analog sticks for the most part. But why the fuck did you include the damn gyro option but still refuse to allow us to drive using the damn D-pad? Is it because you suddenly found out that the Switch controller has a gyro function? Okay, the controller also has a fucking D-pad. Nintendo started using one since the damn NES, or Famicom in Japan. So there is no excuse to not give the players the option to use the damn D-pad. What the fuck is wrong with you, Repixelate? I already explained in the first game why the D-pad should never ever be discarded, and yet you still refuse to give players all the options they deserve. But okay, after that little rant, let's call it, all the other modes in World Tour didn't change. Arcade is what you expect. Pick a card, pick a track, pick a difficulty and drive to win. Along the way, win points to unlock several tracks, which makes more sense than in the first game because in the first game the points were basically useless. At least here you can unlock tracks. Grand Prix is also the same and it still has no end to it. Well, okay, granted, I drove 10 races, one after another, but I still saw no end to it. So maybe the goal is to... there is no goal. Because you see, in a championship, the tracks are randomized, well, usually. There is a preset number, and after you drove on all tracks, you either win or lose depending on the total points. But in Grand Prix, in Formula Retro Racing, you drive until you fall dead, or just go, yeah, okay, fuck this. That actually would be fine for a local split screen with 4 players and an all-nighter party with your friends, but why not add the option to have an actual championship, especially for those that play alone? It's weird that such a simple option still wasn't added, because the first game did the exact same thing for some reason. Illumination is also the same, meaning you drive around for a specific number of laps, and as each lap passes, the faster and faster the opponents will get, to the point where you can't possibly keep up with them. Your goal is just to survive until the end and be first, which can be challenging in the last quarter of laps. So try to create as much distance from the opponents as you can, because later on, no matter what you do, they will catch up. And finally, well, there is a practice mode, but really, do I need to say anything about it? Finally though, the difficulty seems to be a bit higher than in the first game, even on easy. Or maybe it's not the difficulty itself, but more the fact that World Tour is slightly more, let's call it, technical than the previous game. What I mean by that is this: if we go to an oval track, then it's obviously that Slipstream will decide between winner and loser. However, even on easy, the Slipstream plays too big of a role to the point where you simply have no chance of winning at all if you don't drive almost perfectly. Again, this would be fine on normal or even hard, but even on easy? That's a bit overkill. On the other hand, I like that you have to use the slipstream more often or have to enter the corners perfectly, which increases the technical and precise driving. Which would be perfect for the fucking D-pad! So, if you liked Formula Retro Racing, then you probably will like World Tour as well. If you like Virtua Racing, then you probably will like World Tour as well. But if you don't, well, then this game isn't for you, so why the fuck are you here?